there's been a fair amount of kind of hoping that games might, for example, edify war or change the nature of war. This was particularly salient in World War II when we had nuclear weapons, and suddenly the course of war could be completely changed in a matter of minutes or hours versus, in the past, war kind of unfolded over months and years. So military officials were kind of grappling for a new way to make decisions because we had this like huge new responsibility, and we would have to make decisions much faster. And game theory, which is the form of mathematics founded by John von Neumann, a Hungarian mathematician, around 1944, was sort of touted to be the promising new science of decision making that would help politicians and military officers make these important world-changing decisions in rapid time. And this was kind of the basis for all of our nuclear diplomacy. So, for example, mutually assured destruction, the idea that if we have two nuclear powers, they can maintain a kind of uneasy peace. If one strikes the other, the offended party will retaliate and kind of completely destroy maybe the whole world, basically. So by having lots and lots of weapons, we can kind of maintain this stasis. And this was actually not a super rational policy, because ultimately, if one country bombs the other, is any moral human being going to be able to hit the button and say, let's end the world now? So it was a pretty strange policy and kind of an irrational one by most standards. And it kind of incited this huge arms race that is quite unfortunate. But interestingly, a game also helped ease that to some extent. So in 1983, Thomas Schelling, a economist and political scientist, organized a kind of Kriegspiel-like game for 200 top American politicians and military officers, where they thought through, like, what would nuclear war look like? If Russia hit us like this, how would we respond? And so on. For 2 or 3 weeks, they just workshopped every imaginable outcome for a nuclear strike. And they realized that the politicians and military officers realized that America didn't really have the technology they'd need to kind of back up some of the threats they were making. And B, most of the outcomes were so horrifying. It would be much better to never engage at war at all. Like most of the outcomes, even for like a tactical, quote unquote, limited nuclear war, would end up ending the world, or at least with like 1 billion human casualties. So this inspired the Reagan administration to open sweeping arms control negotiations with the Soviets. So we can see that games have been maybe in some ways harmful to our policies and sometimes helpful. But it's also it goes back really far. If there's a amazing papyrus scroll in the British Museum that's, I think, 3,500 years old from Egypt, showing a gazelle playing a board game with a lion. And so there's this really ancient idea that games in some way are like elevating war to a level where the intellect can operate. And I think this is true to some extent, but not always.